The story I'm about to share with you happened to me about 2 years ago. My boyfriend and I were watching Netflix on a Sunday afternoon when he suggested that we'd go out for dinner. I thought it was a great idea. I was getting hungry, and at the same time, I needed a break from the binge watching. Later in the day, we got in the car and drove to a nearby restaurant just outside of town. On the way there, we were speaking about just random things, and nothing too important enough for me to remember exactly, but I do remember being excited to go eat something. I was starving at this point. Once we arrived at the restaurant, we parked the car and had entered. Jack, my boyfriend, had previously made a reservation, and the host took us straight to our table. We made our orders and had a nice meal. I remember our food being delicious, and that we spoke about several things, including us going for the next step in our relationship. I was so happy that night. Little did I know what was about to happen next. Once we finished dinner, we left the restaurant and were walking in the parking lot towards our car. I saw someone in the corner near the alley right in front of us. I couldn't distinguish its face, but I will never forget his eyes. It was very dark, but in the middle of the darkness, all I could see was a pair of glowing red eyes. I looked at Jack and told him to come see it, but it had disappeared already. It must have run when I took my eyes off him. Shaking it off, we got into the car, and on the way home, I told Jack what I'd seen in the parking lot, of course. He said it must have been some random guy or an animal, and it was just too dark to see anything clearly. "Don't think about it," he said. That line, I remember clearly. We were passing a secondary road that passed through a forest, and it was pitch black outside, but we could see nothing. The sky was clear, and a few minutes passed when all of a sudden I saw a shape in the sky. It was going the same speed as our car, but it was far enough away that I couldn't tell what it was. It looked like a bat. At least that's what my guess was. What bird flies at night? I told Jack to look, and he pulled over to stop the car. We were both staring at it, and without speaking a word, just observing. He then tells me that it had to be a bat or a bird, something that could be explained. We debated what it could have been, but in the end, we just weren't able to reach a conclusion. So Jack started the car and turned on the lights. But in that moment, right in front of the car, we saw the shape of something bigger than a man, but with wings, and it suddenly just disappeared into the sky right after we turned the lights on. We were terrified. "What was that thing?" I asked Jack, and he was stunned. I told him to take me home immediately, and I didn't want to be on that road anymore. Not with that thing out there. Just as Jack was about to start the car, we heard something heavy hit right on top of us. We knew it was heavy because we could see the dent that it had made. Jack took out his 9mm from the glove box and tells me to stay inside of the car and just to call 911. I told him not to leave and just to drive home, but he didn't listen. So we left the car and I called 911. Not long after he left, he told me that there was nothing on top of there. It was just a big dent. I told him okay and just to wait inside the car until the cops came. He agreed, and when he grabbed the door handle, something at a high speed took him flying away. I could see for a brief moment, and then they just disappeared. The only thing I remember was hearing Jack screaming while that thing was taking him away. I was powerless and frozen inside the car, and shock just took over me. When the police arrived, they took me in. They tried to help me with a blanket and some coffee, but when I started speaking, I told them what happened. Of course, they didn't believe me and what I was saying. They just thought some random person either took Jack and left me there, or Jack just ran away. The police couldn't find any leads and just assumed that he'd run away. The case was closed, and to this day, Jack was never found. The local folklore speak about a creature called the Mothman, and the description matches what I saw that night. I will never go into the woods again.
It all started during a camping trip with my friend Peter. For many years we have been going to the same place every summer, but this time was different. We made our base camp always in the same spot, in a small clearing in the middle of the forest. Our car stayed parked at the forest entrance, and it's a 5-mile walk till this area. We spent most of our time fishing in a nearby lake. We have a small boat that stays here all year, and we have been using it since always. We don't catch a lot of fish, but we have a good time. Later in that day, Peter wanted to check the fireflies at night. He said there was a place we could see them clearly, and we could get closer to them. I was excited to see the fireflies and immediately said yes. Nick came, and we walked to the spot Peter was talking about. We walked about a mile when I started seeing the fireflies. Peter said we should stay behind a bush to not scare them away, so we crouched and stayed hidden. We were just watching them move around in the air when I saw something in the trees. I wasn't sure what it was, but tried not to pay attention to it. On the way back to the tent, we were walking through the trail when I heard something behind me, like tree branches breaking. I told Peter, but he dismissed it and said it was probably an animal. But that didn't make me any less scared. As we walk, I continue to listen to the sounds behind us. I told Peter this time, and he looked at me to try and calm me down again. He said it was probably just a fox and that there was nothing to be worried about. I said okay. He turned forward, and before we started walking in front of us, we see a creature standing on 2 legs, reptilian in shape, just looking at us. Me and Peter were frozen and speechless. It felt like a nightmare, until the creature ran into the trees. We ran as fast as we could to our tents. The only thing I wanted were the car keys. We left everything else behind. We arrived into my car and left. Our things were left there, and we never spoke about this again or told anyone about what we saw that night, until today. I live alone in a small suburban area, located near a forest entrance. From my backyard you can go directly into the woods, so that means a lot of the time I have animals in my backyard, like raccoons or foxes. One night I heard the noise again, and went to the bedroom window to check it out, but I couldn't see anything. The noise did not stop though. I went downstairs to check for myself. I opened the door, but still nothing. The noise had stopped. Probably because I scared the animal. So I went back inside. I went to the kitchen to have a glass of water, and when I was done, I turned the kitchen lights off. At that moment, I had the biggest scare of my life. I could see in the window a lizard-like creature, peeking, trying to peek inside. At least, that's what I thought it was doing. Terrified, I ran upstairs and locked myself in my bedroom, and did not leave until morning came. I've kept this story to myself for years, but figured it was now time to share it.
It all happened when I was 12 years old. I'm now a grown man, but I will never forget that night. I still have nightmares about that night, and I never go out at night near the woods. Even during the day, I would have trouble walking through them. It was a normal afternoon during summer. I had finished playing outside with some friends and went inside for dinner, but before I went, I took a quick shower. When I was in my bedroom preparing myself, I heard some growling noises coming from outside. At first, I thought it was a dog, but it felt too close. I walked closer to the window. I wanted to see what animal was doing these growling noises. I couldn't see anything, but the growling was still there. I looked everywhere, but nothing. Later in the evening, after having dinner, I went to my room to play some more before sleeping. Since it was summer break, I could stay up longer. While playing, I started listening to stomp noises on the roof. My room is on the second floor, so I was directly under. I stayed there for a while, just listening to the stomping. It sounded like someone was walking on the roof. A few more seconds passed and the stomping stopped, but that was when a chilling sound came from behind me. Outside the window, a sound of scratching on the glass could be heard. I looked back and I saw it. A figure of something that looked like a dog and a man at the same time was outside my window, drooling and growling at the same time. I screamed. My parents came to my room, but the creature was already gone. I told my parents what happened, but they didn't seem to believe me. No one ever did. I love running in the night. No one is in the streets. I can run and appreciate the silence around me. Sometimes I run through town, other times I run in the woods. Close to my place, there are a few trails that go through the woods. It might be creepy for some, but I always enjoyed it very much. So this night, as I'm running on these trails, I started listening to running footsteps behind me. Because I wasn't listening to music while running, I stopped to check behind me to see if someone was there. I looked around, but I saw nothing. Dead silence. I continued running. After a few seconds, same thing happened. Footsteps again. I stopped and asked out loud if someone was there. In my head, I thought it could be an animal or something like that. I waited a few more seconds until I listened to another noise. A growling, like a dog or wolf. It was the first time I'd felt afraid on my night runs. The growling was getting closer. A few seconds later, in front of me, coming from behind me, in some bushes. A creature, no, a man or a dog, started running towards me. Frozen in terror, I looked at it for just a second, right before I started running as fast as I could. I think I've never ran so fast as that day. Luckily, I managed to get to the main road before it got me, but I didn't stop there. I kept running until I was home. When I arrived home, I couldn't believe in what I just saw. I tried to sleep as best as I could, and the next day, I did some research on local wildlife, but I couldn't find anything. Not until I'd looked for cryptid encounters. It looks like where I live, there are others that have seen the same creature I saw that day, the DOGMAN. I never again ran at night. I was riding my e-bike through a road a few miles from my house. The road was surrounded by forest on both sides. Everything seemed fine until I heard a sound coming from the tree line. Even though I had no idea what it was, my worst fear had always been possibly getting attacked by a wild animal. So I sped up the e-bike to make sure I wasn't in any danger. But I was horrified to see that whatever made the sound was actually running behind the tree line alongside the road. What I thought was an animal at first would actually alternate from running on all fours to running on two legs. I started to freak out because it looked like a bear or a wolf was running like a human as well. I'm thinking it's just some weirdo in a costume, but what really concerned me was even though I was going almost 20 miles an hour on the e-bike, whatever this thing was keeping up with me. I was just hoping I could make it to the gas station a few miles away to get some help. However, I was worried I'd run out of juice on the e-bike before I got there. By now, I was going full speed and this damn thing was still chasing me. The whole time I could hear something sprinting and grunting through the forest. Also, I could see it in my peripheral vision. And just a few seconds after that, that's when I finally hear it emerge from the tree line and chase me from behind on the road. It was too dark to probably see anything. I just leaned down on my e-bike and basically prayed. Thankfully, the lights of the gas station soon emerged from the distance. It wasn't until I rode into the parking lot that I finally looked behind me. But when I did, I saw nothing. None of the other customers looked like they saw anything either. I called my mom soon after to pick me up. I haven't ridden my e-bike around the area since then. I have made attempts with friends to look for whatever it was though, but we haven't had any luck finding it. I'm going to tell you something I never imagined possible. Being a skeptical person that never believed in the supernatural, or whatever creatures that supposedly exist out there. This story happened during my late 20s, and I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a Friday night during a session of browsing and chatting on the internet with my online friends. Because I lived in the suburbs, it's common for me to spend more time at home. Also, because nothing exciting happens in my neighborhood, or so I thought till that day. Like I was saying, it was a Friday night and I was on my laptop when I started listening to noises coming from trash cans directly under my window, between the fence and the side of my house. I usually don't pay attention to this because there is a forest area behind my house, so it's common for raccoons to come close to the houses and mess up garbage cans. But the noise was already annoying me and was getting louder, so I went downstairs to scare the raccoons away. When I reached the kitchen, I peeked through the window to the trash cans, and as I thought, there was trash on the ground and one of the cans was laying sideways. I got angry now because I had to go outside and pick up the trash before any more raccoons would come and make an even bigger mess. I got closer to the back door and opened it. As soon as I put my eyes in the backyard, my body froze. The first thing I saw behind the bushes was a tall figure that was too big to be a man. Also, the silhouette didn't look like one. Shocked, I kept looking at the figure, and with time my vision started adapting to the darkness, and I could start to really see what was in front of me. It had a muscled body and the head that looked like a dog. In a matter of seconds, the creature's eyes locked on me and it began to growl. This is when I managed to close the door and moved away, but I kept my eyes on the door. A few seconds passed and I could hear the steps of the creature walking in the door's direction. When it reached the door, the growling stopped, but another chilling sound started. The sound of claws scratching on the door. I will never forget that sound. I slowly walked to the corner of my living room, not knowing what to do but just trying to stay hidden. That's when I listened to the creature moving around the house, going towards the side, near the kitchen window. I was terrified, but I needed to see that thing again. So I locked my eyes on the kitchen window, and that's when I saw it again. It stopped in front of the window, growling and looking around, like it was hunting me. In a moment of sheer panic, I ran upstairs to my bedroom, locked everything and closed myself in the closet. The situation felt like a nightmare. I wasn't capable of rational thought and couldn't even think of calling 911. But then again, what was I going to say? No one would ever believe me. I cried myself to sleep inside that closet. The only time I had courage to come out was in the morning. Fortunately, the creature was already gone, but it left the back door with a few scratch marks. I researched online and it looks like I had an encounter with the DOGMAN. There are a few witnesses that had similar encounters with the creature looking like this one. One thing is for sure, it made me a believer.
I am an outdoorsman, always have been. Also, there isn't much to do where I live, besides going into the wild. Don't get me wrong, I love it, but it would be nice to have some other options. Anyway, as I was saying, last week, I was having beers with my best friend in our backyard, having fun and telling jokes to each other. Then, on a more serious note, he asked me if I knew about the DOGMAN. I told him yes. I have heard about it, but it was a local legend. He then tells me it was not a legend and that he could prove it to me. We had a few beers. I was sure he was just trolling me, but I decided to say yes. Why not? He told me he would meet me tonight with hiking gear ready. I asked him why we had to go at night. He answered, "There's no other way to see the dogman. Also, get your rifle ready. We might need it." I said yes. I also didn't want to sound afraid. We were probably not going to find anything. Night came. We started the hike directly from my backyard, as it leads directly into the woods and connects into the massive forest area. While walking, my friend tells me a story about this dogman, and the first time he saw him. He was night fishing in a lake not far from here, alone, until he spots it in the distance. On the shore, a shadow. In the beginning, he thought it was some guy, just staring. But it couldn't be. It was too big, and the shape didn't look like a man. So he quickly aimed his flashlight at it, and it ran away. But my friend got a glimpse of it. It wasn't a man. It had fur from head to toe, but it ran on 2 legs. Now, I know my friend for years. He never told me this story. I asked him why he never told me this, and why tell me now. He said he didn't know how to tell me this, and he didn't want me to think of him as crazy. But also, he couldn't hold this much longer. He needed to tell someone. I told him it was a story hard to believe, but I think he was right. He did see something on that shore, but it could have been a bear or something else. The night can play tricks on you. Anyway, we arrived at the lake area where he saw this creature. We put the gear down and waited behind some bushes. We tried to move very little. Every noise could scare animals off and reveal our position. But after 1 hour of nothing, my friend tells me it is time to change our position, but this time, each one of us in a different place. I didn't think it was a good idea to separate, but I agreed. He was the more experienced hunter from both of us. I slowly moved to a different place. When I reached my new position, I could see my friend also relocate. He was now on the far side, opposite to me. I was the one closest to the lake, and he didn't have to wait long. When I started to hear something from behind me, footsteps approaching. Slowly and closer, I kept hearing them, passing right in front of my bush. I knew it wasn't my friend. He was too far away. But all of a sudden, the footsteps stopped, right in front of me. Those were a few seconds of horror. I didn't know if I should have peeked and see what it was, or just stayed in hiding. The choice was done for me, as I felt an arm grab me and throw me in the air. When I landed on my back, I was sure something was broken, because I couldn't move, except my head and right arm. I tried to get up, to look forward and to see what it was, and here it was. A creature standing on 2 legs, looking at me with terrifying eyes. I was for sure gone now. Couldn't move. I was easy prey. The creature got close. This was it. The end. But, from nowhere, I heard shooting. My friend, of course, was shooting at the creature. I raised my head to see it, and it was gone. My friend quickly came and helped me. He stood guard till morning and went for help. After a few hours, we were rescued by park rangers, and they took us to the hospital, where I was treated for a broken leg and a twisted ankle. That was the last time I was in the woods, and I don't think I could come back again. Also, I'm afraid of the creature caught on my scent. It will be back to finish the job.
I was traveling cross-country in my van. To save money on hotels, I would park anywhere I could spend the night so that I could sleep in the van. Most of the time, I would just use a parking lot, like the ones at Walmart. But since I was a bit far away from the city, I decided one night to park in an area near the woods that was recommended by a friend of mine. He was someone who lived a lifestyle that they call the van life. Even though I wasn't one of them, I took his advice. On this particular night though, I realized that I was the only one in the area. I was kind of creeped out, but I was too tired to drive another 2 hours to a more populated area. So I decided to stop acting like a coward and go to sleep. I laid in the back of the van where I usually go to sleep, but not even an hour into my sleep, I woke up to the sound of something walking around outside. At first, I hoped that it was just a deer, but I realized the heavy footsteps meant that it was something bigger. My heart stopped, thinking that it was a bear looking for food. To make sure, I took a peek through the covering of one of the windows of the van. Even though it was dark outside, the light from the moon allowed me to see something that I'll never forget. Just about 10 yards away, I saw what looked like to be a giant dog or wolf standing upright, staring towards the van's location. I honestly thought that I was either dreaming or just seeing things due to my sleep being interrupted. I didn't want to keep looking at it, but I thought it was important to keep track of where it was just in case it got closer to the van. I did everything I could not to make a sound. I especially made sure that it didn't see me peeking from the corner of the window. But after what felt like minutes of staring at the creature, it ran off into the dark. I had no idea if it went back into the forest or not, but I wasn't going to risk it. I got in the driver's seat and started the van to get the hell out of there. But just as I was about to drive away, the van started shaking. It was as if something was at the back trying to jar the doors open by pulling on the handles. I didn't even hesitate. I drove out of there so quick that I thought I was going to get a flat tire due to driving over rocks and branches. As I was driving away, I couldn't see anything in my driver's side mirror, but as I was speeding down the highway, I started feeling kind of angry. I had no idea what it was, but I should have put the car in reverse and ran it over. But overall, I was just glad to have gotten out of there. The next day, I did tell my friend about what had happened. He told me he's never come across anything like what I described. And when he asked some of his friends who had used the spot before about it, none of them had ever seen anything like it as well. I tried convincing myself that it really could have just been a bear or a wolf. But the more I thought about it, the more I asked myself what bear or wolf could grab the handles of a door like a human being.
This story happened several years ago. I work for a security firm, and we're contracted by a company who owns a couple buildings that have been abandoned for years. So, as a security guard, it's our task sometimes to do frequent checks on some of these properties. Some are almost in the middle of nowhere. On this one night, it was my job to check on an unmanned building that was located near a forest. As soon as I arrived at the location, I parked my car and began checking the perimeter of the building. But just as I was in the middle of doing so, something near a group of trees caught my attention. There was a noise, and as soon as I flashed my light in the direction of it, that's when I ended up illuminating something that I was convinced was a furry animal. For a split second, the thought entered my head that I was going to make some noise and scare it away. But the more my eyes and brain adjusted to what I was seeing, that's when I felt a cold chill just overwhelm me. Whatever I was looking at, it was standing on 2 legs. And while I've actually come across bears before that could do that, I knew that this wasn't one. It wasn't balancing itself. It was standing on 2 legs like that was its normal stance, and its arms were hanging relaxed by its torso. I couldn't see the whole thing clearly because some bushes and branches obstructed the view, but I could tell it was big. It had hair all over its body, and its face was definitely canine. But worst of all, it was definitely looking at me as well. Shh. It didn't take me more than a few seconds to make the decision to get the hell out of there. Since the only thing we were allowed to carry was mace, there was no way of me defending myself if whatever this thing was decided to attack me. So I ran to my car and drove away as fast as I could. I didn't report anything unusual that night because I wasn't interested in being written up for not properly doing my rounds. But I wasn't interested in going back there again, so I put in a transfer to a different location. When that didn't work, I quit a few days later instead of going back there. That's how much the incident shook me. But my coworkers, who are still working at the same company, have never reported anything similar to this day.
This story happened when I was a young kid. I was staying over at my friend Gilbert's house for the weekend. He and his family actually lived on an Indian reservation since they were Native American. But despite both of us being from different backgrounds, we became friends because we were into a lot of the same stuff. On the weekends, we hung out. We spent most of the time playing video games, watching movies on cable, reading comic books, and eating junk food. This particular weekend was even better since Gilbert's family had been gone for a few days. One night, while playing video games, we heard a noise outside. We didn't think too much of it at first. But when the noise sounded like it was coming closer, it got harder to ignore. At first, we figured it was a stray dog, since this area was full of them. But we started to notice that whatever was making that sound seemed to be much larger. I asked my friend if it was possible that it could be a bear, but he said there was no way since they don't come out this far from the mountains. And just as we were in the middle of our conversation, that's when whatever was outside made a low rumbling growl. When we heard that, we immediately jumped up from our seats. My friend had the same expression on his face that I must have had, which was a look of fear in both our eyes and our mouth wide open. Even though we were scared, we decided to carefully take a quick look outside through the blinds. There, being illuminated by the moonlight, was what looked like a giant wolf or dog. It had pointy ears, body covered in fur, eyes glowing in the dark. It was looking around its surroundings before eventually looking toward the house. As it started to move, something about the way it walked in all fours looked a bit off. But before my friend and I could figure out why that was, to both our shock, that's when we saw the animal stand on its hind legs. At that point, my friend and I didn't even know what to say. There was something very human-like about the way that it was standing. And at that moment, that creature must have seen the light coming from the window, because to our horror, while still on its hind legs, that's when the creature made a dash toward the house. My friend and I wasted no time as we sprinted toward his room. But just as we entered and locked ourselves in his bedroom, we heard the creature climb up the side of the house. It proceeded to pace around on the roof shortly after. My friend and I couldn't do anything but hide behind his bed. And I'm not ashamed to admit, but we started to cry since we were so scared. We wanted to call for help, but the only phone in the house was in the kitchen. So the only thing that we could do was listen closely in fear as we heard the claws on its foot tap the rooftop. After a minute or so, the creature finally jumped off. But just as Gilbert and I thought that could have been the end of it, that's when we started to hear it growling close to the exterior walls. We could hear it circling the house. It was accompanied by what we could only describe as the creature scratching or dragging its nails across the walls and outside. The sound sent shivers down both of our spines. And just when we thought it couldn't get any worse, we suddenly heard the sound of one of the windows in the living room breaking. Both Gilbert and I thought that we were going to have to make a run for it, because if we didn't, we might have to fight off whatever was breaking into the house. And just as we braced ourselves, that's when we heard the sound of a truck coming toward the house. We both had a sense of relief when we realized the familiar sound of Gilbert's family dogs barking from the flatbed of the truck. Whatever was trying to break into the house had obviously noticed the truck as well, because the sound of the glass breaking had stopped. But even then, my friend and I stayed where we were. We were still too frightened to move. All we could hear was a bunch of commotion outside. The creature sounded like it was running away as Gilbert's family and their dogs gave chase. It wasn't until they came back that we finally came out from hiding, and we told them what happened. Upon hearing our story, they told us that when they came home, they saw what they thought was somebody trying to break into the house. But as they chased it, they could see that it was an animal of some kind. Unfortunately, the thing ran away so quickly that they lost track of it. Wanting to be cautious, Gilbert's family decided that we all stay in a friend's house that night. Later that night, as we were settling in, Gilbert's family had told us that it was possible that whatever we saw that night could have been a skinwalker. Of course, I had no idea what that was, but they described it. I learned that a skinwalker is a Native American legend, and it's evil. To no surprise, after hearing that, I wasn't able to sleep that whole night. After going home the next day, I eventually spoke to Gilbert on the phone, who informed me that, fortunately, there were no further incidents. But as weird as the story already was, it gets even weirder. A little over a week later, Gilbert had called to tell me that a few kids on the reservation had been walking through the arroyo and found a bunch of junk, including an old fridge. But when they pried it open, that's when they made a gruesome discovery. There inside the old fridge was the decomposing body of a nude man. I could feel the hairs all over my body standing up after hearing that. He also told me that the local authorities said that it was most likely just some drunk who wandered into the arroyo and accidentally locked himself inside the fridge. But Gilbert and I had always felt like that story of the dead man in the fridge was something a lot more sinister.